Good day and welcome to my channel. I'm DeMetrius, your host, and in this video, we'll be looking at Letter of Apostle Matthew, the Gospel and Intimate Review, Part 18 by yours truly. You can enjoy this and many other reviews at my website, lawrencedemetrius.com. Please go and visit today. And right now, we'll jump into today's review, picking up at Matthew chapter 13, verses 52 through 57, looking at the scribes of Yahweh. In the consummation of his parables, Christ expounds upon the literary works of Yahweh's scribes and how they taught with words that were divinely inspired in ancient times. However, words inspired in times past are considered fresh and new to generations who had yet to learn them. Thus, Yahweh must assign teachers to teach them in every generation. As noted by Christ, true prophets often lack substantial honor in their own native places and families. Therefore, it is not uncommon for their ministries to thrive better in other areas amongst other people. We see that at Matthew chapter 13, verse 57. Christ himself was not initially known as having great notoriety. In fact, his familial status was modest in that his stepfather, Joseph, was a carpenter. However, due to his exemplary character and incredible insight, Christ's greatness was eventually revealed. This gives credence to the idea that one's character should exemplify that of one who teaches and obeys divine directives. Also, they must strive to only be their unique selves and not duplicate others, with the exception of Christ. Yahweh reveals the honor of his servants to the audience he wants them to serve at the appointed time. In fact, it is he who promotes them. We see that at Psalms 75, verses 6 and 7. Amongst other things, Jesus Christ was certainly a holy prophet. Prophet in the Greek is prophetes. It is a foreteller, poet, and an inspired speaker, meaning a speaker that is inspired to speak by the Spirit of God or the Holy Ghost. Although Christ was able to do miraculous feats, he limited his acts amongst his own kin and countrymen due to their unbelief in him being the prophesied Messiah and his ability to perform miracles. We see that at Matthew 13, verse 58. Unbelief is apatheia in the Greek here in this verse. It is faithlessness, disobedience, and disbelief in Jesus as the Christ, and disbelief in his teachings. Unbelief is why Christ limited his work amongst his close of kin and countrymen. If Christ had to do this, it is certain his disciples may need to do so as well. At Matthew chapter 14, verses 1 through 13, we're looking at for the love of power. Noted in this passage is a Roman leader by the name of Herod the Tetrarch. Such historic figures give credence to the actual existence of the person and works of Jesus the Christ in first century Rome. There are numerous Roman leaders who were present at the time of Christ's mortal lifetime. Events surrounding the person and works of Christ are also recorded in reputable secular archives of Rome. Roman history discloses how important public opinion was in obtaining offices of high influence. Those who desired such seats did what they believed they needed to do to be done to secure these seats of high influence, which included executing senseless deaths of innocent people like John the Baptist and, of course, our Lord Jesus Christ. At Matthew chapter 14, verses 14 through 23, we look at what one has is enough. In most cases, what Yahweh imparts unto his servants is sufficient to effectively carry out the ministry he appoints them to. Upon receiving clear instruction to use what they have from the Lord, they are expected to go forth therein with faith-filled obedience. And so doing faith in themselves and their God-given abilities is strengthened. Prior to his ascension back to the Father, Christ expressed that his church would do the works that he did, but in greater capacity. We see that at John chapter 14, verse 12. We also see it at 1 John 4, verse 17. In this passage, Apostle Matthew notes the learning experience of Apostle Peter, by which a key point of successful ministry is revealed. It is that one must reverently acknowledge and request permission of the Lord to step into certain situations. Christ granted Apostle Peter permission to test his faith when he knew Peter's faith was weak. Nonetheless, Christ used the opportunity to help Peter recognize the power of faith that existed within him. As the Lord is not to be tempted or tested, there are some feats uh, that are not to be attempted without divine intervention. All right, we see that at Deuteronomy 6, verse 16, and at Matthew 4, verse 7. In fact, Christ instructs his brethren to request of the Lord deliverance from certain testings. That's at Matthew 6, verse 13, in that prayer formula that the Lord gives us to pray. And we are supposed to be praying that on a daily basis. Even Christ requested in the Garden of Gethsemane to be delivered from the cross. We see that at Matthew 26, verse 39 and 41. There is always a reason for any test required of the Lord. However, he will never allow more upon his children than they can bear, nor will he permit them to encounter challenges they cannot overcome. We see that at 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13, and James 1, verses 2 through 4. Tempt in the Greek here is ekpidrazo. It means to test thoroughly. At Matthew 14, verses 34 through 36, we see the audience awakes. When Yahweh is with and actively working through a person, it will be noised abroad, and there will be an audience anticipating the arrival of Yahweh's messenger. It matters not that some do not welcome their coming. The service and message of the Lord's messengers are not for all audiences. His power and presence will always validate the authenticity of his messengers, or the messengers that he sends. In the perspective of the audience, he sends them to serve. And we see that at 1 Corinthians 2, verses 1 through 4. At Matthew chapter 15, verse 1 through 20, we see the traditions of men. In this passage, Apostle Matthew expounds upon the sin of being devoted to vain religiosity and traditions of men. For many, it is a great challenge to avoid this sin, especially when those who in leadership replace divine directives with unwarranted legalities. That happened way back in the ancient times. We see it at Hosea chapter 4, verse 6, and we also see it at Matthew 5, verse 19. He notes Hebrew Pharisees and scribes who interrogated Jesus Christ about why his disciples disregarded the traditions of their elders. And these were the Pharisees. In the Greek is Pharisaios. It is a separatist. And a separatist is a person who separates, withdraws, or succeeds from an established church. It is an advocate of separation, especially ecclesiastical or political separation. It is also a Hebrew sectary, which is a member of a particular sect, especially an adherent of a religious body regarded as heretical or schismatic. A sectary is a Protestant of non-conformant denomination. It is a person who is zealously devoted to a particular sect. Scribe in the Greek is grammatius. It is a writer. Okay, what these are what scribes are. A scribe is a writer, a professional secretary. It is a town clerk and a keeper of records. In every nation has their particular scribes, okay? And then you have tradition, which is paradosis, I mean. It is transmission, it is a precept, and specifically Hebrew traditionary law or ordinance. An elder is a presbyteros. It means older, a senior, specifically an Israelite said harem that is figurative of the celestial council or Christian presbyter, which in the early Christian church was an office bearer who exercised teaching and priestly administrative functions in hierarchical churches, such as a priest or an elder in the Presbyterian church. One must keep in mind that all nations have some form of religious and political sectarianism. It is also wise to note that just because a person is considered an elder does not mean they are wise or worthy to be honored as a master teacher of divine insight. We see that at Matthew chapter 15, verse 3. Hebrew elders of Judaism should have known the divine laws given to Moses by the Lord. They should have also known that it was forbidden for anyone to add or take away from these laws. Not only did the elders disobey this command, but they taught and enforced man-made traditions instead of administering the Lord's genuine instructions. In so doing, these fallen leaders, these fallen Hebrew leaders of Judaism, made themselves the least in Yahweh's kingdom, according to Matthew 5, verse 19. Success in divine ministry is only warranted by keeping and obeying the Lord's directives. We see that at Joseph, believe that was Joshua chapter 1, verse 8. True light and liberation only comes with a continual adherence to the Lord's directives. We see that at Matthew 11, verse 28 through 30. Christ responded to his interrogators with the following question: why do you also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition? We see that at Matthew 15, verse 3. Transgress in the Greek is a parabahino. It is to go contrary to and violate a command. Commandment is antole in the Greek. It is an injunction, which is a judicial process or order that requires one to whom it is directed to do or refrain from a particular act, and is an order, admonition, and authoritative prescription. Christ notes that the ultimate disrespect of the Hebrew elders, scribes, and Pharisees was their act of teaching their own traditions in place of divine directives. And indeed, we have so-called Christian leaders doing that today. Matthew 15, verse 4 through 9 touches on that. This sin is the primary reason why Israel was then considered the valley of darkness. It was so because the Lord's word was neither known or taught as it should have been at that time. Matthew 15, verse 14. This sin left many souls hungry for Yahweh's word. Thus, Yahweh sent Christ to reiterate and make it available to those who truly desired, hungered, and thirsted for it. In that, Christ called and admonished people to hear and understand. They did have a degree of comprehensive ability to do so. And of course, all mortals have the ability to do so per the Lord through the teachings of Enoch. Enoch touches on that as well, said that the Lord gave us not only a tongue, gave us a mind to understand the Lord's word of wisdom, but he also gave us tongues and breath to speak and express ourselves, and especially admonish one another with the Lord's word of wisdom. So yes, we definitely have that, and people of all generations have that. We just have to choose to do it. Now, per Christ's example, it is appropriate for teachers of the Lord to invite. We don't usurp the Lord's word on anybody. You don't force yourself. That's what you call laying hands on men suddenly. That means to usurp your own divine authority on other people. Servants of God are not supposed to do that. All right, they are supposed to invite people who desire the insight that the Lord has given them to receive it. And that's what we're supposed to do. That we see that at Matthew 15, verse 10, and we also see it at 2 Timothy 2, verses 24 through 26. Now, called in the Greek is proskaleomai, It means to call toward oneself. It means to summon. It means to invite. It's like, hey, you come here. That's what it means. Here is a kuo. It means to hear in various senses, and to understand is suniemi in the Greek. It means to comprehend, to put together mentally, to act piously, to consider, and it also means to be wise. In Matthew chapter 15, verses 11 through 20, Christ imparts to his audience divine truths using precepts that should have been taught by the Hebrew leaders. He instructs the obedient teachers of God to mark and avoid those in teaching positions who lack divine insight. We see that at Matthew 7, verses 15 through 20. We see it at 1 John 4, verses 1 through 6, and 2 John, verses 7 through 11. Matthew chapter 15, verses 21 through 31. We see the woman of Canaan. At Matthew 15, verse 24, Jesus Christ notes that he was sent to the lost sheep of Israel. Sent is apostello in the Greek. It means set apart, and send, it means to send out on a mission. Lost is epilumi. It means to fully destroy, perish, and lose. In Matthew 15, verse 22, 26, and 27, Christ likens a Canaanite woman to a baby dog who humbly consents to this likeness. However, she persisted in her request that he grant deliverance to her daughter who was vexed with the devil or with an evil spirit. Vexed with the devil, all of that means in the Greek, dahimanidzambahi. It means to be exercised by a demonic being. Exercise, by definition, is to put one's faculties and rights into action, practice, and use. It is to make use of one's privileges and power. It is to worry, make uneasy, and annoy. All right. And a devil is a subordinate evil spirit at enmity with God that has power to afflict humans both with bodily disease and spiritual corruption. A devil is an atrociously wicked, cruel, and ill-tempered person, and it is also a person who is very clever, energetic, reckless, and mischievous. The woman did not ask Christ to do what he was not already doing for others, as he was famous for healings, both physical and spiritual. In his dialogue with her, she mentions that puppies, that baby dog, benefit from the crumbs that fall from their master's table. This gives credence to the idea that even puppies were beloved members of their master's household and were permitted to be in intimate quarters of their homes, like the dining area. In short, she recognized Christ as a man of genuine love, and that he loved her and her daughter regardless of their nationality. Although he was sent to restore the lost sheep of Israel first, he did indeed have every intention of serving all nations with healing, salvation, and deliverance, which of course we see that at the ever famous St. John verse 3, verse 16. We also see it at 1 John 2, verse 1 and 2. Due to her faith-filled, humble, and wise demeanor, Christ granted this Canaanite woman her request. We see that at Matthew chapter 15, verse 28, and he'll grant you your request as well, as long as you approach him properly and with faith and in honor and in reverence. First of all, acknowledge him as the Lord Jesus the Christ, the prophesied Messiah, and by your own belief of your own heart and with your own mouth, confessing and initiating his lordship in your life personally. Nobody else can do that. I'm sure there may be many people, certain people praying that you will eventually do that with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength. But there's only one person that can initiate that great benefit in your life, and that is you. You must do it with your heart, and you must confess it and initiate it with your mouth. Nobody can keep you from doing that. This gives credence to the idea that this Canaanite woman was favored of Yahweh. She was favored of the Lord, meaning she was one of those who from the foundation of the earth was chosen to be one of his exclusive worshipers and to no doubt love him and worship him and have fellowship with him forever and ever. She was one of those people, and you may be too. And acted upon her right. She acted upon her right and privilege as one whose heart was truly whole toward him. Is your heart hold toward the Lord today? Because that's the kind of worshiper that he searches the whole earth for, from generation to generation. And he knows that they are there. He knew them from the foundation of the world and sprinkled them throughout all of the 70 generations of mankind. And that simply means all of the generations that he has chosen to be. And he sprinkled them throughout from the beginning to the very last of generations, and he knows that they are there. And if you are one of those people, you certainly have a right, you certainly have a privilege to receive eternal salvation, healing, and deliverance, and everything that you could possibly ever need, or that's beneficial to your life now and forevermore, if your heart is truly whole toward him. We see that at Second Chronicles 16, verse 9, and Romans 2, verse 11. And there we have it. That is the letter of Apostle Matthew, the Gospel and Intimate Review, Part 18, by yours truly. You can enjoy this and many other reviews at my website. Just go to lawrencedemetrius.com, and everything that you will need to edify your spirit is right there. And I pray that you will go and do that today. And I want to thank you for allowing me to minister this word to your spirit. Until the next time, be blessed in the matchless name of Jesus Christ.